Ember Witch. Book 1. The Lich. Volume 1. Black Tragedy. Chapter 3. Half-Blood. October 21st to December 21st, 458 BME. Fragment 22. The Hunt. They silently stepped across the snow, keeping their hearts slow and their breath low. All three of them had been anticipating the moment they could move in for the entire day, but now that the sun had gone and the moon hung high above them, they began their mission. Fevra close behind Vera, who in turn was behind Hana. They stepped together, using each other's prints to minimize the sound and hide their numbers. Hana reached the outer wall of the mid-sized castle and gestured for the other two to stop. With only 20 necromancers within the keep, the amount of security was minimal. They had approached the castle from the southeast at a perfect blind spot. Before they had left, they scouted for a few hours, giving them appropriate information on how many of the necromancers would be patrolling the walls. They counted 4 men stationed at each corner, with another 4 men in between them, for a total of 8. The 4 in the center would patrol the wall, rotating around it once an hour. It took around 15 minutes for each man to reach the previous man's spot, giving the hunters plenty of time to take out each of them without raising any alarms. Hana crouched down and placed her hands together. Vera stepped forward, and with the help of Hana, she leaped onto the wall. Fevra stepped forward and did the same. After landing on his feet, he leaned over the wall and reached out for Hana's hand. She grasped it, and the two, using each other's strength, pulled Hana up the wall. Despite the height of the walls reaching 20 feet on most sides, it was built next to a hill that had effectively shortened this particular place on the wall. The 3 hunters nodded at each other and split up into 2 groups. Fevra and Hana went left, while Vera went right. Keeping low, Vera sprinted towards the corner, drawing a dagger from her knife pocket. She stepped quickly, using her momentum to keep her pace as she stabbed her blade into the neck of the first guard. The metal sunk deep and blood burst out, spraying over the walls. She pushed his body over the edge to keep it from clattering to the stone, then continued to move with speed to her second target. Fevra and Hana used their silent movements to take the center guard by surprise. Fevra sunk his blade into his throat, then, just like Vera, had shoved his body over the wall. Hana continued running as Fevra took his kill to reach the corner guard. She spun on her feet, kicking the unarmored Fyron in the head, snapping her neck while simultaneously flinging her off the wall. Vera, now on her 4th victim, threw her knife, letting it sink deep into his heart. She sprinted up and ripped the dagger out, while using her speed to do a flying kick, letting the body topple over the wall. She flipped around, landing on her feet, and took off to meet the other 2 at the end of this side. Fevra had taken 2 guards out and was moving towards his 3rd, with Hana close behind him. They approached the Fyron together and simultaneously snapped his neck while pushing him over. They sprinted off to the end of the wall and reached Vera. In total, it took them exactly 20 minutes to kill each necromancer and meet up on the northwest side of the wall. Vera gestured her head, and the 3 of them moved to the staircase that would take them to the central courtyard. Before they had begun their mission, Vera had used a crude map to plan out their exact movements. They were now moving on to the west wing. There had been no detailed maps or blueprints on the keep, but with the similar construction to the castles in Yoku, Vera was positive that they would find most of the living quarters within the west wing. They stepped down the stairs and across the dirt and snow until they came across the door. Vera crouched down and pulled a lock pick from her tool belt. She inserted the pick and swept it across the tumblers, getting a feel for the lock. After a few moments of fiddling, she turned the handle and the door creaked open. She placed her pick back in her bag and stepped inside. The entrance they had taken led them through a hallway that split off in 2 directions. They snuck down the hallway, then split up once again. Vera took the left path, while Hana and Fevra took the right. Each direction turned back the same way as they had approached the split, however the left side went down a set of stairs while the right went up. Vera took each step, then turned around a corner, heading right. She came through a hallway that held 3 doors on both sides. She tested the first door, and it was locked. Cursing in her head, she pulled her lock pick out once again and slipped it into the lock. Moments later the door swung open. She peered into the darkness and saw only old dusty furniture, crates that had been smashed, and other assorted items. She stepped to the next door on the opposite side, and it opened without incident. Peering in, she found 2 necromancers sleeping together in the same bed. If they were not going for total stealth, she could have just used her color to locate which rooms each one was in, but the moment she pulled her aura around herself, every necromancer in a 100-foot radius would feel it. She stepped quietly into the room and pulled her dagger out. She came to the right side of the bed first and quickly plunged the blade into the sleeping male's temple. She pulled it out, and before the other Firen could wake, she leaned over the corpse and slit her throat. She snuck out of the room and went to the next door, again on the opposite side of the hallway. Slipping the door open, her next target laid in a fetal position on his bed, snoring like a bear. Vera slit his throat, then moved on. She repeated the process for the last 3 doors, killing another pair in the same bed and the last single victim. She turned back and headed to meet her companions. Hana and Fevra only found 3 necromancers on the top floor and had taken them out with no issues. They met Vera back at the hallway they entered into and followed her to the next section of the castle. If her counting was correct, there were only 3 necromancers left, and she had a good idea of where they would be. Given that this was once a small castle, but still a castle, there had to be a section that would hold the lords, meaning that the leaders would have taken these more luxurious rooms for themselves. The 3 tracked around several hallways full of rubble and destroyed furniture until they came to the main entrance. They approached the pillar that split a staircase into 2 half-spirals. They each stopped moving as a deep darkness pierced their perception. Vera looked to Fevra, who silently shook his head and pointed to the clock set within the center of the stairs. Vera turned her head in confusion as she noticed the ancient symbols on its face. She gestured to Hana, who stepped up to it and studied it closely for a moment. She made gestures with her hands signifying that there was something more to it than just being a clock. Vera gestured back to return to it when their job was finished. Hana nodded and then followed Vera up the stairs. Fevra, however, stayed put, staring at the clock. His mind flashing back to the blade that killed his brother. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the clock, and before Hana or Vera could stop him, he pressed his color into it. As his magic delved beyond the metal and stone into a deep dense pit, something evil touched his mind. He pulled away from the clock, but the force stayed with him. He fell to his knees and tore at his eyes. Vera pulled his arms back and held him to the floor while Hana kept watch.
What the fuck are you doing? You just gave us away, you fucking idiot.
Vera whispered, and Fevra coughed.
It forced me to do it. There is something down there.
Fevra replied, trying not to be loud as he recovered from the mental assault. Jinra stood from the chair he had been mindlessly leaning in and drew his sword from its sheath. Despite being a well-trained mage, he was not going to give up his position until he knew exactly who was in the castle. He hadn't spent much time with the clan, but he knew this color was not one of them. He silently stepped across the hall and opened Haru's door. He stepped up to the bed and whispered into the old man's ear.
Someone has infiltrated the keep. Lock your door when I leave.
Haru opened his eyes, then stood from the bed and shut it behind Jinra. He heard the door lock and then moved to the next door, which opened before he could reach it. Jinra put a finger to his mouth and Ren nodded. They reached Koji's door and opened it. Koji was already throwing on a shirt, and again Jinra placed a finger to his mouth. The girl who was sharing his bed sat up and covered her breasts in a panic. Koji threw her some clothes and followed both Ren and Jinra out into the hall. They stepped to the staircase and peered over to see 2 female Firen and a male Lyran who was just now regaining his footing. They stepped out of the hallway and drew their color around themselves. All 3 hunters looked up as 3 flashes of color bloomed out in the darkness. They drew their color only moments later and stood in ready positions.
High Priestess Hana, you bless us with your presence. How might we serve you on this fine winter night?
Ren asked in a mocking tone, and Hana laughed.
You have some nerve, don't you? How have your experiments been going? Poorly, I bet.
She replied.
On the contrary, your holiness. Can't you feel it?
Ren asked. Hana stepped forward, summoning a long sword in her hand.
You have bastardized the church for the last time, Ren. You and Haru will die tonight just like the rest of your clan.
Hana replied, then jumped back as a black dart exploded from the floor. Vera and Fevra were dumbfounded by the sight in front of them. Everything Persian said was true. The green-skinned Noki Elven stood tall among the two Firen with his black aura flowing around him like ink in water. He extended his arm and another 3 darts exploded from the floor. Vera and Fevra jumped back, then retaliated with their own spells. They threw fire towards the Elven, who slapped it away with his hand. Ren sprinted forward and jumped from the stairs, slashing down at Hana, who parried the attack. Koji followed closely, casting beams of energy that Hana dodged away from clumsily. Jinra stepped down the stairs, letting his black shield absorb several spells from Vera and Fevra. He swiped his sword, clashing with Vera's deep red blade she summoned in order to deflect the attack. Fevra, using his larger size, spun on his feet kicking the Noki, but was interrupted by a quick movement that made him tumble to the ground. Jinra stepped forward and used his color to create a mass of energy below Vera, which flung her into the air. As she flipped around and nimbly landed on her feet, Fevra had summoned his blade and had gone on the offensive. He clashed blades with the Noki in a rhythmic pattern as if to the beat of a drum. Each beat rained sparks upon the ground. Hana performed a low sweep that caught Koji by the legs, causing him to trip. He stumbled into her grasp and was repelled backwards with a wave of energy. He smashed against the wall and struggled to his feet. Ren elbowed Hana in the face, causing her to stumble back towards the main door. As she recovered from the elbow, a beam of light orange energy blasted her through the door. She smashed to the snow with a crunch and then quickly rolled away from a dart that had stabbed into the ground inches from her head. Fevra clumsily slapped back an attack, then dropped his sword, summoning a dagger in its place that he used as a throwing weapon. It sunk into the Noki's leg and caused him to falter in his next attack that missed Fevra by a foot. Derek took the opportunity to punish the opening. She kicked the Noki, which pushed out his leg, causing him to tumble to the ground. He rolled forward, breaking the dagger into sparks, and backed towards the door. Hana had managed to get to her feet and deflected several of Koji's lazy shots of energy and used her color to reflect a slash that would have cut into her arm by Ren. As Koji attempted to use another beam, Hana drew in her power and shot out a dart that pierced into his hand. Koji fell backwards, holding his hand in shock as the dart exploded, blowing it clean off his arm. Hana smiled and turned back to Ren, who summoned a second sword and began frantically slashing at her. She blocked everything he had thrown at her using her superior speed against him. She followed an attack that was overextended and slashed Ren's leg, which spurted blood. He fell to one knee, and Hana brought her blade down, cleaving it straight into his skull. Jinra felt the color of Ren vanish and knew he had been killed before Vera cast a bolt of energy into him. The gem at her neck glinting in the darkness. He couldn't hold his shield long enough to absorb the spell, and as it ate through his defense, he jumped to the side, getting tagged in the hip and pushed out of the building. He landed on his back and tried to roll over, but felt another blast of energy flying at him. He extended his color and absorbed the energy. He felt another source of magic drop and knew that Koji was finished. Hana stepped forward as Koji crawled backwards, begging for mercy. She smiled at him.
Our goddess grants no mercy for cowards,
she said, then plunged her blade into his heart. She turned to see both Fevra and Vera coming down on the Noki. Jinra spun around, launching himself out of the way as 2 spells exploded where he had been.
Bind him, we will get far more answers from him than any of the necromancers.
Vera said, and then gathered her energy into the necklace again. Fevra pointed his stump towards the elven and charged his color, causing a blue flame to engulf the silver cuff. Hana stepped forward and placed her sword at his throat.
It's over, elf. Drop your aura and blade and you won't die,
Vera said, holding her color at a boiling point. Jimmer dropped his sword, then leaped into the air, casting a wave of black energy out. Fevra, Vera and Hana all pushed out their color to defend themselves against the wall of fire that consumed the courtyard. The heat was so great the snow and ice melted instantly. The wooden structures around them burst into flames that burned black as the night. Vera collapsed to the ground and began screaming as her energy had imploded upon herself. Fevra had managed to launch the bolt of energy into the sky, and Hana simply had to stand up after being knocked over. Jimmer summoned a pole axe and rushed forward, swiping it towards Vera, but was stopped by Fevra, who quickly deflected the attack. Hana moved forward and fell to her knees at Vera's body. She pulled the tooth from her pocket and moved Vera's hands away from her chest, which had been punctured and burned by the gemstone necklace. She cracked the tooth in half and poured a few drops of liquid onto the injury, which began to pull the skin back together. Fevra deflected several large swings and shot a bolt of energy from his cuff. It soared past the elven and struck the stone wall, dozens of feet away from them. He cursed, then dodged away from a downward swipe. The Noki's axe sunk into the dirt, and Fevra took the opportunity to spin his body around, kicking the Noki in the stomach. He flew back and landed on his back with a gasp.
Fuck, that hurt,
Vera said, then sat up to watch Fevra jump on top of the Noki. The pole axe burst into sparks as Fevra focused his energy into the breathless elven. He pushed his color out, and then in an instant the Noki fell unconscious. Fevra stood from the Noki and ran to Vera, who held out a hand. He lifted her off the ground and looked at the burn mark right below her throat.
I'm fine. It will heal up in no time,
Vera said, and Fevra smiled.
Good, I would hate to have to constantly use my color to heal you,
he said in a joking manner, which caused Vera to elbow him.
Come on, let's finish the job,
Vera said, then walked over to the Noki elven. She picked him up and walked him into the main entrance. She searched around and found a small amount of rope that she used to tie him up with. Hana and Fevra followed close behind, leaving the courtyard to burn out.
The only ones left are Haru and Asuka, both of which are extremely weak. Haru is old enough to not hold any threat, and Asuka was more known for her abilities in the bed than her magic. I can take care of them if you two want to figure out what's behind that clock,
Hana said. Vera shrugged and looked at Fevra.
What is your opinion on it? The blood blade could be in there,
she asked, and Fevra approached the clock.
I have only had experience with the Black Blade, but what I felt behind this thing felt nearly identical to it. Dark, evil emptiness begging for any relief from its existence. Whatever it is, we need to be prepared,
Fevra replied.
I know exactly who can answer our questions,
Hana said, then stepped up the stairs. She pulled her aura around herself and let it flow out into the stone walls. She felt the presence of two people, one of which was sitting calmly and the other frantically trying to stop shaking. She walked past the first room to deal with Asuka. She stepped to the door and took a deep breath before she charged her energy and used it to break the door open. Asuka screamed and tried to lash out with a knife, but Hana simply knocked the blade from her hands. Asuka stumbled backwards, crying.
Please don't kill me, High Priestess Hana, I'm begging you. I will do anything, please don't kill me,
she said, and Hana turned her head in confusion.
Why would I spare you? You have done nothing to convince me otherwise.
Hana then began strangling her with a pink aura that wrapped itself around her neck. Asuka struggled and fought against the energy in panic before a loud snap rang out. Hana dropped the body to the floor and turned around. She walked down the hallway back towards the stairs, then stopped at Haru's room. She gathered her energy again and kicked the door in. Haru was sitting cross-legged on the floor, meditating calmly. He looked up with serenity and peace on his face.
High Priestess Hana, it has been a long time since we last spoke. I am not afraid to die, so if you have come here for that you will find no pleasure in it.
He said, and Hana dropped her aura.
You will die tonight, but not before you answer our questions. Come on.
She said and held out her hand. Haru reached out and grasped her hand, letting her help him stand.
Despite our disagreements, I respected you the most. Your devotion to the Dark Goddess went far beyond any of the other high priests,
Haru said as she walked him out of the room.
You taught me everything I know about Her Majesty and the way of necromancy. I didn't want it to come to this, but your actions must have consequences. You were about to bring the world to a standstill over what? An argument? Over hubris? I am sorry, Haru, I really am,
she said as they reached the stairs. Haru stepped down the stairs, looking over Vera, Fevra, and Jinra with acknowledgement. He reached the bottom and stood before the three of them.
Ren said you would come, and so you are here. I had hoped that our first encounter near Shikari would have been our last, but Vera works in mysterious ways. She wanted you two here for a reason. Perhaps it is to simply end my life or for a greater purpose. What is it you need to know? I am at your mercy. Any questions you have I will answer truthfully, you have my word,
Haru said, then Hana stepped behind him.
First of all, what were your plans? We have been on the most frustrating goose chase for months. Why did you go through all of this? What was your end goal?
Vera asked as she folded her arms.
He was the reason why,
Haru said, pointing to the unconscious Noki on the floor.
Jinra contacted us shortly after we separated from the church. He offered us gold and power, but we didn't need any money. We weren't interested in becoming the rulers of the East. We only wanted our religion to be reinstated as a legitimate part of the Church of the Gods. We asked for his king to reinstall the Church of Vera within the world. Jinra told us that if we forged a blood blade, create a weapon powerful enough to prove that the power of Vera still existed, that he would ensure our church would live on in full power once again. We needed to practice and experiment with different forms of necromancy in order to have a full understanding on the ritual needed to forge a blade. We stole bodies in the night, hoping that we could use them in our experiments. When you came across us months ago, we had 6 bodies hidden in our camp. We used those bodies days later to create zombies. They had been dead for too long by that point and resulted in failure,
Haru explained as the 3 hunters stood around him.
So you believe that this elf would keep his word? I see you are old, but how could you trust him?
Dara asked, and Haru looked over to Jinra, who was lying on the ground unconscious and tied up.
I didn't trust him, but the chance he was telling the truth was far too tempting to pass up. I know the history, but it has been hundreds of years. Imagine that you were offered something as great as this. You have the chance to change history in your favor. Would you not take that chance and hope it worked out?
Haru asked, and Vera let her arms down.
No,
she said, then stepped up to him.
I would have told that bastard to fuck himself. You can't change history. You can't change hundreds of years of facts that the Elven despises the Dark Goddess and all of her followers. You are an old fool not fit to hold that kind of power,
Dara said, and Haru looked down to the ground.
I know. I had many months to think about our actions. I don't regret them, but I see how my heart got in the way of my mind,
he replied.
My next question revolves around Takashi. What was his part in all of this?
Dara asked fiercely.
He was to create political instability within each hold, killing major members of the government. This would have allowed for my clan to set our experiments upon the cities. The more people to die during this chaos would give us more bodies to use for the next hold. Our inevitable goal was to have enough zombies and abominations to eventually take the heart. Once we held the heart, the Elven were to invade, crushing everyone else who would fight back. After which the Elven King would grant up the heart as our sanctuary to rebuild the church.
Haru explained, and both Vera and Fevra looked at each other in horror as their fears were realized.
Okay, finally, what is behind this clock? There is darkness spewing out of it like an ocean. We need to know how to get to it and destroy it,
Vera asked, and Haru stepped forward. He placed his hand on the clock face with a smile.
There are 2 things down there. I assume you felt our ritual the other night. We were successful in forging a blade, but before that we created something entirely different. This creature was the first step in our experiments to summon a watcher. What lies beyond this clock has no name, no history. It is a one-of-a-kind,
he said, then expanded his color around himself. Fevra and Vera pulled their auras around them in reaction, but were stopped from moving by Hana, who gestured with her head as Haru pressed a green flame into the top symbol. They watched as he moved to each symbol, pressing, turning, and adjusting them in a sequence. He stepped back after spinning the pentagram into place. The door shifted upward and in on itself, revealing a black maw that delved downward into the castle's floor.
I'll stay up here with Haru and the Elven. You two have far more combat experience to deal with whatever is down there,
Hana said, and walked over to Jinra.
When you get the blade, bind it and we can deconstruct it. We never finished the forging process, so it is unstable in its current state,
Haru said, then took a step back from the door. Vera looked to Fevra, who shrugged and began walking down the stairs into the darkness.